The courtroom was colder than usual that morning, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the weight in the air, thick, heavy, uncomfortable. It was the kind of chill that clung to your skin, not from temperature but from tension. It lingered around the wood-paneled walls, settled into the crevices of the judge's bench, and weaved its way between the polished pews filled with spectators, lawyers, and the press. People leaned in close to whisper, their murmurs echoing like soft thunder as their curious eyes darted to the woman sitting alone near the back. Her skin worn like leather, her eyes rimmed with red, her hands folded tightly around a weathered brown purse as if it carried her very soul. Her name was Delilah May Carter, a name that had never appeared in the local paper, never rung out at city council meetings, and certainly never been spoken aloud in a courtroom filled with white pillars and whiter faces. She had been invisible most of her life, cleaning homes, scrubbing toilets, raising other people's children while her own went without. No one ever looked her in the eyes unless they were giving instructions. No one asked her opinion unless it was about how much bleach to use on tile grout. For 34 years, she had worked as a maid in Greenville, Mississippi, moving silently from one house to another, bowing her head when spoken to, apologizing even when things weren't her fault. People called her Miss D. Employers called her reliable, quiet, humble. But no one, not in their wildest dreams, could have imagined that on this day, she would be standing in front of a judge and jury, pointing her calloused finger at Officer Garrett D. Monroe, the town's golden boy, the man everyone loved, the officer mothers told their sons to admire. Garrett Monroe had blue eyes and a square jaw, the kind that fit on recruitment posters and political flyers. He had saved a boy from drowning once, or so the newspapers said. He handed out Thanksgiving turkeys with a grin and appeared in so many charity photos that people began calling him Saint Garrett. His record was spotless. His reputation, untouchable. So when Delilah filed a civil lawsuit against him, the town gasped as though she had challenged God himself. The Crenshaw family, one of the old names in Greenville, had employed Delilah for over a year. Their daughter Macy was 17, spoiled, loud, and broken in ways only rich children can be. Delilah had seen it all, witnessed the coldness with which Mrs. Crenshaw dismissed her daughter's tears, the way Mr. Crenshaw barely came home anymore, and how Macy would sometimes lock herself in her room and cry for hours. Delilah didn't pry. She wasn't paid to ask questions. She folded towels and picked up broken glasses. She turned her head when shouting started, as she had done all her life, because interfering never helped someone like her. Until that one night, June 3rd. Delilah was in the basement folding laundry when the front door slammed so hard it rattled the rafters. Footsteps thundered overhead. Then came the voices, Macy's terrified screams, Mrs. Crenshaw's panicked pleading, and a man's deep, angry roar that didn't belong in that house. Delilah climbed the stairs slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she reached the living room, she saw him, Officer Monroe, dressed in civilian clothes but wearing the badge on his hip like a weapon. He was red-faced, sweating, furious. He wasn't there on official duty. He was there for something personal. Something dark. Delilah stayed still behind the stair rail, unseen. She watched as he grabbed Macy by the arm and shouted inches from her face. "You told them what?" he barked. "Do you realize what you've done?" Macy sobbed, saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean to, that it was an accident. Mrs. Crenshaw hovered nearby, whispering his name like a warning. And then Delilah saw it, his hand rising, then falling across Macy's face. A slap so loud it seemed to slice through the air. Something in Delilah snapped. Maybe it was the way Macy looked afterward, like a child who'd just been betrayed by the person she trusted most. Or maybe it was the scream, the real scream that came from Macy's chest, one not born of fear but of brokenness. Delilah stepped into the room. Her voice, though trembling, was clear. "Please stop," she said. Officer Monroe turned to her with a stare that could cut steel. "You need to leave," he said coldly. "Now." But Delilah didn't move. That hesitation, just 3 seconds, was enough. Monroe crossed the room in a flash, finger pointed in her face. "You don't get to tell me anything," he growled. "You're nothing but a damn maid. You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" He shoved her shoulder, just enough to make her stumble. And that's what he told the police when they came, after he called them himself. He said she assaulted him. That she interfered with his investigation. There was no report, no paperwork, no evidence. Just his word. And that was enough to have her arrested. They booked her, fingerprinted her, held her in a cell where roaches crawled across the floor. No lawyer came. No phone call changed anything. She would have rotted there, forgotten, if not for the girl. Macy, who had recorded everything. She hadn't meant to, but she had left her phone camera running during the entire encounter, hiding it behind a stack of textbooks on the kitchen counter. 2 days later, she visited Delilah at the church soup kitchen, her hands shaking as she handed her the phone. "I'm sorry," Macy whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." Delilah watched the video 3 times before speaking. The 4th time, she cried. Not because she saw herself being humiliated, but because, for the first time in her life, the truth was on her side. She didn't have much, a few $100s in savings, no formal education, no family lawyer. But she had something Officer Monroe hadn't expected. Courage. And a righteous fire that had been simmering for far too long. She filed the lawsuit quietly. There were no cameras at first. No reporters cared. But once the video was leaked anonymously to a local activist group, the story exploded. Protests began. The mayor issued a vague statement. Monroe was placed on administrative leave, which only made the community more divided, some defending their beloved officer, others enraged at the injustice. Delilah didn't waver. She walked into court with her head held high, not because she was unafraid, but because she was done being invisible. So when the bailiff called her name, and she stood, spine straight despite her aching knees, and raised her hand to swear the oath, she turned to face Monroe. Her finger lifted, slow but sure, pointing straight at him, not just at the man, but at everything he represented. Power unchecked. Justice denied. And in that single moment, the room went silent. Not a breath. Not a whisper. Because somehow, everyone knew, they were about to witness something that could not be unseen. And whatever happened next would not just change Delilah May Carter's life. It would shatter the illusion that silence was safety. The courtroom hadn't moved in over 30 seconds, yet it felt as though hours had passed since Delilah May Carter raised her hand and pointed at Officer Garrett D. Monroe, her trembling finger disrupting decades of silence, shame, and social hierarchy in one motion. Reporters shifted in their seats. The Crenshaws, sitting stiffly on the defense side, stared forward as if paralyzed. Monroe's jaw clenched so tightly the veins in his neck bulged beneath his freshly shaven skin. His lawyer, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and a voice that could charm an oil tycoon out of his land, stood up to object, but the judge raised her hand and told him to sit down. "Let her speak," the Honorable Judge Renee Winslow said. And with that, Delilah took the stand. Her voice at first came out like a rusted faucet, a drip here, a hesitation there, but it carried truth, raw and unfiltered. She began at the beginning, painting a picture of her life not as a victim, but as a witness. A witness to quiet injustices, to invisible wounds. "I've worked for folks in this town longer than some of you been alive," she said, her southern drawl soft but steady. "I cleaned their houses, washed their clothes, raised their babies. I seen what goes on behind closed doors. I kept my head down, 'cause I thought that's what you do to survive. But that night I saw a child cry for help, and I couldn't just fold towels anymore." The courtroom listened, some leaning forward, others clutching pens that had stopped moving. Delilah detailed the night Monroe stormed into the Crenshaw home, the rage in his eyes, the violent slap that silenced the room, the way Macy's whole body shook like a tree in a hurricane. She described being ordered out like trash, being shoved, arrested, treated like a criminal for daring to speak. "He called me nothing but a maid," she said, her eyes burning. "But even a maid got eyes. Even a maid knows right from wrong." Then came the recording. Delilah handed her phone to the bailiff, who played the video for the jury and the gallery. The footage was grainy, the angle skewed, but the audio was undeniable. Monroe's voice thundered from the speakers, You told them what? You trying to ruin me. Then Macy's crying, the slap, and finally Monroe yelling at Delilah. Get outta here before I say you attacked me, you damn maid. The courtroom rippled with gasps. A reporter dropped her pen. Monroe's lawyer objected again, this time demanding the jury disregard what he claimed was incomplete, illegally obtained audio. But the judge allowed it, citing public interest and the credibility of the plaintiff. Monroe squirmed. His face flushed. For the first time, the badge he always wore like armor seemed too heavy for his chest. Then it was Monroe's turn to testify. He walked to the stand like a man who'd won battles with just his stare, but this time the shine in his boots didn't blind anyone. He looked at the jury and said Delilah had misunderstood the situation. That he was responding to a tip about missing prescription drugs Macy had allegedly been stealing from her mother's cabinet. I wasn't there in any official capacity, he said. I was there as a family friend, concerned for Macy. I never laid a hand on that girl. Then he paused. And I sure as hell didn't assault Miss Carter. That woman's got a chip on her shoulder. She didn't like being told to mind her place. The courtroom shifted again. That phrase, mind her place, hung in the air like smoke from a burning cross. Delilah didn't flinch. The jury noticed. Over the next few days, more witnesses were brought forward. Neighbors who had heard shouting that night. A former maid from another family who spoke of Monroe's temper and how he once threw a beer bottle at her feet for not answering the door fast enough. Then came Macy. She took the stand with shaking hands but a steady heart. She admitted she'd been scared. That Monroe had been visiting their home more and more, even when her mother wasn't there. That he wasn't just a family friend, he was a controlling presence, someone who said he was trying to discipline her the way her absent father wouldn't. He told me if I ever said anything about the way he talked to me, no one would believe me, Macy said, tears slipping down her cheek. He said people like him get to tell the story. And people like Miss Delilah just get told what to do. The courtroom was no longer divided. People who once praised Monroe now avoided his gaze. Delilah's supporters, at first just a handful of activists with signs outside the courthouse, had grown into a wave. Black churchgoers in their Sunday best. College students with handmade posters. Even elderly white women who had once hired Delilah now came forward, some crying, some ashamed. One, Mrs. Addington, a widow in her 80s, took the stand on day 4. She said Delilah had worked for her for 12 years and never once raised her voice. She taught my grandbabies to read, she said. And I never paid her what she deserved. I just assumed she was okay with it. That's what we all did, assumed. As the trial unfolded, Monroe's defense began to fall apart. His alibis turned shaky. A review of his department record revealed several internal complaints, excessive force, misconduct, all buried before they reached the public. Delilah's case had opened more than just a courtroom door. It opened the floodgates. By the end of week 2, 2 other women had come forward anonymously. Both black, both former maids in other homes Monroe frequented. Both with stories that mirrored Delilah's in disturbing ways. The judge ordered that their testimony be recorded under seal, but their words echoed through the courthouse halls nonetheless. And still, through all this, Delilah showed up each day in the same worn shoes, her purse clutched tight, her back straight. When asked by a reporter how she felt seeing Monroe sit just feet away, she answered, "I've been near worse men with less to lose. I'm not scared of him. Not anymore." The closing arguments were delivered on a Friday morning, so quiet you could hear the soft ticking of the courtroom's antique wall clock. Monroe's lawyer tried one last time to paint Delilah as bitter, vengeful, perhaps even mentally unstable. She's been in the background of people's lives so long, he argued. She's created this fantasy where she's the hero and my client's the villain. But the jury wasn't buying it. Delilah's attorney, a young black woman named Nia Henderson, delivered her closing with fire and grace. "This is not a fantasy," she said. "This is not a storybook. This is a real woman who was violated by a man who thought his badge made him untouchable. Miss Carter didn't ask to be here. But she stood here anyway. For Macy, for herself, For every voice that's been silenced under the weight of a polished shoe and a polite smile. When the jury left to deliberate, the courthouse exhaled for the first time in days. Some cried. Others prayed. Delilah sat quietly, her fingers moving along the frayed edge of her purse. She wasn't expecting victory. She had lived a life where justice was a word said on television, not in courtrooms. But she also knew this. No matter what the verdict said, she had already done the unthinkable. She had spoken. She had stood. She had made the world look at her. And that alone was revolutionary. The jury was out for 12 hours. 12 long, aching, uncertain hours that stretched across a day and into the heart of the evening, until the courthouse, once buzzing with news crews and protesters and angry whispers, had become ghostly quiet. Delilah May Carter sat in the hallway outside the courtroom on a hard wooden bench, her fingers laced together in her lap, eyes steady on the floor beneath her feet. The same floor she had once scrubbed on her hands and knees for the district attorney's wife back when she was 24. The janitor passed her, mopped beside her, nodded at her. Not as a servant to another servant, but with respect. Delilah didn't need anyone to speak to know what her presence meant now. She wasn't just Miss D the maid anymore. She was a symbol of something larger. Around her sat a mosaic of faces, young and old, black and white, students, pastors, mothers, men in suits who had never set foot in this part of town until this case. Some prayed aloud, some whispered into phones, and some just watched her, waiting. Not just for the verdict, but for how she would carry it. At exactly 8:13 p.m., the jury returned. The bailiff's voice rang out like a bell through the courtroom, summoning everyone back to their places. The gallery refilled with careful reverence, and even the judge's expression softened as she took her seat. Delilah stood when asked, knees cracking, but her spine stayed straight. Garrett Monroe sat across from her, eyes hard, lips pressed into a thin line. He hadn't spoken to reporters in 3 days. His once confident posture now drooped slightly, as if he, too, could feel the weight of what was coming. The foreman of the jury, an older black man with silver hair and a calm voice, stood with a slip of paper in his trembling hands. He handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The courtroom held its collective breath. On the matter of Delilah Carter versus Officer Garrett Monroe, the judge read aloud, pausing just enough to make hearts stop mid-beat. We, the jury, find the defendant liable on all counts. Gasps rose. A sharp sound of someone crying out, a soft exhale from the gallery, and the cracking sound of Delilah's purse hitting the floor as her hands went to her mouth. She didn't scream. She didn't sob. She stood completely still, like a statue made from all the moments she had swallowed her voice, endured humiliation, turned the other cheek. And now, finally, she had been heard. The judge continued, damages awarded to the plaintiff in the amount of $500,000 for emotional distress, $100,000 in punitive damages. But money was never what Delilah came for. The real reward was justice. The real victory was validation. Across the courtroom, Monroe shook his head in disbelief. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. His face had turned red. Then he did something no one expected. He stood. Right there, in open court, without being called on. Judge Winslow raised a brow. Mr. Monroe, you are not permitted. But he waved her off. Your Honor, I have something to say. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Delilah's attorney turned, lips parted, ready to object, but the judge, perhaps sensing what was coming, nodded. Proceed, Officer Monroe, she said coldly. Briefly. Garrett Monroe turned to the gallery, then to Delilah. His voice was low, but the microphone picked it up clearly. I never thought this would go this far, he began, his hands gripping the rail in front of him. I never thought anyone would believe her over me. That alone caused ripples of murmurs across the room. Because let's be honest, who was she? A maid. A woman who's been scrubbing floors longer than I've been alive. She wasn't supposed to matter. I was the one with the badge, the reputation, the community service awards. He laughed bitterly. And I still lost. He looked directly at Delilah then. You think you won, Miss Carter? You didn't. You've ruined a man's life. There was venom in his voice now. A final lash of control. You dragged me through the mud. You let people think I'm some kind of monster. But you and I both know. I didn't do anything you haven't seen other men do 100 times. A hush fell. That was his confession. That was his truth, laid bare, raw and shameless. Not regret, not remorse. Just the entitlement of a man who had never been held accountable, and couldn't comprehend that his time had run out. Judge Winslow banged her gavel. That's enough, Mr. Monroe. One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt. But Monroe didn't care. He was still staring at Delilah. You'll always be a maid, he spat. Even with the money. And then, just as he turned to be escorted out, Delilah finally spoke. Not with a shout, not with anger. Just a quiet, razor-sharp voice that sliced through the tension like glass. I may be a maid, she said, but now the whole world knows what kind of man you are. And that will follow you longer than any title ever followed me. The entire room froze. The kind of silence that follows truth. That statement made headlines across the country. Made to hero, Delilah Carter's courtroom stands sparks national movement. News vans lined the courthouse streets. Civil rights leaders came forward. Organizations offered her support. But Delilah wasn't interested in fame. When reporters asked what she would do with the money, she said, start a foundation. For girls like Macy. For women like me. Who keep quiet because they're scared no one's listening. In the weeks that followed, Monroe's world unraveled. He was suspended from the force indefinitely. The police union rescinded their award. Further investigations uncovered a trail of misconduct buried for years, each stone turned over now revealing a rot that the town could no longer ignore. 2 of his former commanding officers were forced to resign. His pension. Frozen pending criminal investigations. His face, once admired, now haunted headlines next to words like abuse of power and perjury. As for Delilah, she returned home that night to her small apartment on the east side of town. The same place she'd lived in for 19 years. That night, her neighbors were waiting. Not with pity, but with pride. They cheered her name. An older man pressed a single sunflower into her hand. A little girl hugged her legs and whispered, "You're brave like Rosa Parks." Delilah smiled, softly, humbly. Then she walked into her home, sat down at her kitchen table, and took out a notebook. She wrote 4 words at the top of a fresh page, "The silence is broken." Because this wasn't just the end of a lawsuit, it was the beginning of a ripple. Churches began hosting listening circles. Young women came forward with stories of harassment and abuse. City Hall held public hearings. And everywhere Delilah went, people stood when she entered the room. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. In a world that had written her off as a background character in everyone else's story, Delilah May Carter had stepped to the front of the courtroom and, with a single finger, pointed not just at a man, but at an entire system of silence and submission. And the moment she did, she didn't just win a case. She changed a town. Maybe even a country. The poor black maid they ignored? She was the conscience they tried to bury. And her voice, quiet, unshaken, resolute, will echo for generations.